Worst Prison Food in Pelican Bay State Prison True Crime Documentary. The Smell of Punishment. Like this story? Hit subscribe, like, and comment, because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's the dark, true story of how food became a weapon inside one of America's most feared prisons. The metal gates of Pelican Bay State Prison close with a sound that shakes the ground, a metallic finality that says you're not getting out. The fog from the Northern California coast rolls over the razor wire, swallowing the watchtowers in a haze that never seems to lift. Inside the security housing unit, the SHU, it's always the same. Gray walls, gray floors, and the dull smell of bleach and sweat that clings to the air. Men live in concrete boxes the size of parking spaces. 23 hours a day, no sunlight, no voices, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional clang of a meal tray sliding through the slot. That tray is supposed to be a lifeline. It's not. In cell 123, inmate Raymond Ortiz stares down at his dinner. A lump of soy patty, lukewarm beans, and a piece of bread so hard it could crack a tooth. He presses his fingers against the bread. It doesn't even bend. Same thing again, he mutters. His voice is hoarse from weeks of coughing. Ortiz used to weigh 190 pounds when he came into Pelican Bay. Now he's down to 142. He keeps a small calendar scratched into the wall. Each X marks a day he's gone without vomiting after a meal. There aren't many X's. For years, prisoners here have whispered the same thing. The food is punishment. It's not meant to feed you, it's meant to break you. In the early 2000s, rumors began surfacing about Pelican Bay's kitchen, stories that sounded too cruel to believe. Inmates claimed their meals were spoiled, reheated leftovers from days before. Others said trays were served with cockroaches crawling beneath the slop. The prison denied it all. But the stories wouldn't stop. In 2011, during the first hunger strike, one inmate wrote in a smuggled letter, "They feed us like animals. The beans smell rotten. Sometimes there's hair in the rice. If you complain, they call it manipulation, and they give you loaf." Loaf, short for Nutraloaf, was the prison's most infamous punishment. A brick-shaped meal made from whatever was left in the kitchen. Beans, vegetables, oatmeal, sometimes even fruit, all mashed together and baked into a tasteless brown slab. The Department of Corrections called it nutritionally complete. The men who ate it called it edible torture. Ortiz remembers his first time. "They said I was mouthing off," he told a lawyer years later. "They took my meals and replaced them with that loaf. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. For 7 days straight. You can't describe the smell. It's like wet cardboard mixed with sweat. You eat it or you starve." He tried to refuse. By day 3, he couldn't stand. Outside the prison, few people cared. The public saw Pelican Bay as a warehouse for California's worst. Gang leaders, murderers, men labeled beyond redemption. They didn't see the sickness spreading inside. But Dr. Ellen Rivers, a state-contracted physician who worked part-time at the prison infirmary, began to notice a pattern. Her patients weren't just underfed, they were malnourished. Iron levels collapsing. Skin turning pale yellow from liver strain. Blood pressure dropping to near fainting levels. One file stuck out. An inmate, 47, collapsed during yard time. When they tested his blood, it showed severe protein deficiency, the kind seen in third-world famine zones. His tray logs showed nothing but soy-based meals for 6 months straight. When Dr. Rivers filed a report, it vanished. A supervisor told her quietly, "Don't make waves. You don't want to be reassigned to Corcoran." Meanwhile, in the SHU, Ortiz's friend, Leon Carter, began documenting everything. With a smuggled pen, he wrote on scraps of legal paper, "Meals cold. Meat gray. Bread mold visible. Rice smells like bleach." He hid the notes inside his mattress. Over time, he collected more than 100 pages, a record of what inmates claimed was systematic starvation. In 2013, the hunger strike erupted again, and Leon's notes made it to the outside through a lawyer visiting inmates in the SHU. A journalist for The New Yorker picked up the story, publishing a piece titled, "Starving in Solitary." The article described prisoners wasting away, losing 30 to 50 pounds, their bodies breaking down. The Department of Corrections dismissed it as inmate exaggeration. But leaked photographs told another story. Trays with patches of mold, meat so undercooked it glistened, portions too small to sustain life. That's when attorney Laura Kim got involved. She represented families of inmates who died in custody, many with medical reports listing malnutrition-related complications. The more she dug, the stranger it became. She subpoenaed food purchase records from Pelican Bay's kitchen. The state claimed to spend over $4 million annually on inmate meals, yet when Laura compared the invoices, the numbers didn't add up. Deliveries marked fresh produce appeared in accounting logs, but inmates reported never seeing a single piece of fruit. Meat shipments were billed weekly, yet kitchen workers testified they hadn't seen meat in months. So where was the food going? Laura visited the prison herself. What she saw inside the kitchen stopped her cold. The floor was slick with grease, boxes stacked to the ceiling labeled soy mix, industrial grade. A cook quietly pulled her aside and whispered, "They cut everything with soy now. It's cheaper. Less protein, more filler. The guys can't digest it, but nobody cares." He glanced nervously toward the security cameras before adding, "Some of it smells bad when it arrives. We just reheat it." When Laura filed her findings, the department called her misinformed. Weeks later, the cook was transferred to another facility, and no one heard from him again. Ortiz, meanwhile, grew weaker. His gums bled when he brushed his teeth. His skin developed sores. He kept trying to write letters to the outside, but most never reached their destination. The ones that did described food that smells like it's been buried underground. He wrote in one letter, "They say prison takes your freedom, but they take your body too. Every meal reminds you you're less than human." The letter reached Laura Kim through another inmate. It became part of her case file, evidence that Pelican Bay's food practices weren't just neglect, but a form of psychological warfare. By late 2014, she had enough to file a class action lawsuit. It wasn't just about spoiled meals. It was about deliberate starvation, a system that used food to enforce silence. But just as the case gained traction, her office was broken into. Hard drives gone. Files missing. Even her backup server wiped clean. Police called it a burglary. Laura called it a message. Inside Pelican Bay, Ortiz woke one morning to find Leon's cell empty. The rumor spread fast. They took him. Guards said he'd been transferred, but no one knew where. His mattress was gone, and so were the notes. A week later, Ortiz received a sealed envelope slid under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No return name, no handwriting, just a printed message, "Stop talking about the food." Ortiz folded the paper and hid it under the sink. He knew what it meant. Leon had talked, and now Leon was gone. The next day, Ortiz refused his tray for the first time. Outside, the hunger strike reignited, thousands of inmates across California refusing food, demanding an end to long-term solitary confinement and the right to basic nutrition. Pelican Bay's administration claimed the protests were gang-driven, but human rights groups disagreed. The media flooded the prison gates, cameras flashing. For a brief moment, the world looked into the darkness behind Pelican Bay's walls. But behind those walls, the retaliation was already beginning. Ortiz was pulled from his cell at dawn. Guards stripped him down, chained his wrists, and dragged him to isolation. "You want to starve?" one said. "We'll help you." They locked him in a room with no clock, no window, and no tray slot. Days passed. He didn't know if it was 2 days or 6. When they finally brought him a meal, it was the loaf, cold, cracked, leaking moisture. He stared at it for hours, stomach cramping, throat dry. In the silence, he thought he heard someone whisper from the next cell over, "They're killing us slow." Ortiz lifted the loaf to his mouth and took a bite. It tasted like nothing. Like dust and despair. That same week, Laura received an anonymous flash drive in the mail. No return address. Inside were photos, trays of food crawling with insects, raw patties streaked with green mold, bread stamped with expiration dates from months earlier. And in one photo, she froze. It was Leon Carter. His face pale, his eyes open but empty, lying on a prison gurney. A nurse's hand visible in the frame. The timestamp showed it was taken inside Pelican Bay's infirmary. 2 days after the prison claimed Leon had been transferred. Laura printed the photos and spread them across her desk. Each image was proof of a system built on decay. But as she looked closer, one detail caught her attention. In the corner of one photo, a label on the food cart read Experimental Batch B4, approved by CDCR Supply Division. She leaned forward, heart pounding. Experimental. The question hit her like a freight train. What if this wasn't neglect? What if it was deliberate? Batch B4. If you haven't yet, subscribe, because this isn't just about bad food. What you're about to hear goes deeper than rot, deeper than cruelty. Inside Pelican Bay, what they called dinner might have been something far more dangerous. The morning fog pressed against the coastal highway as attorney Laura Kim drove north toward Crescent City. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, messages from colleagues urging her to drop the case, emails warning her that prison stories don't end well. But the image of Leon Carter lying on that gurney haunted her. His eyes were open but lifeless, his jaw stiff. The photograph had been taken after the Department of Corrections claimed he'd been transferred. Someone was lying. The word on the food cart label burned in her brain, Experimental Batch B4. She didn't know what it meant, but she intended to find out. At Pelican Bay, food deliveries came through a fenced sally port once a week. Every shipment was logged in thick ledgers kept in the administrative office, or so the department claimed. When Laura arrived, she flashed her court authorization, forcing the warden to let her in. The warden, Robert Leary, was a man built like the walls he managed, tall, square, unbending. His eyes betrayed irritation beneath the politeness. "Counselor," he said, his voice steady but cold. "You're back again?" "Just need to confirm some paperwork," she replied. "About the food," he said flatly. "Still chasing that story?" Laura smiled tightly. "I don't chase stories, Warden. I chase evidence." He gestured toward the office. "Knock yourself out." Inside, the records room smelled of dust and disinfectant. Boxes stacked in uneven towers. She flipped through ledgers, tracing dates and shipments until her fingers went numb. Then, buried in the middle of a binder labeled Inventory 2013, she found it. Batch B4, a protein supplement, experimental formula, authorized by CDCR Supply Division. The line item had no supplier listed, no cost, no delivery signature. Just a code number. When she looked closer, she noticed several consecutive pages had been torn out. She confronted Leary outside the office. "Who supplies Batch B4? He shrugged. "Ask the department. I don't handle procurement." But she noticed something in his eyes, the brief flicker of recognition. He knew exactly what she was talking about. Later that night, Laura met with Dr. Ellen Rivers, the physician who'd once worked in the Pelican Bay Infirmary. Ellen had left the department a year earlier, burned out and disillusioned. Over coffee in a dim diner, Laura slid the photo of Leon Carter across the table. "Recognize this?" Ellen froze. Her spoon clinked against the mug. "That's Leon. He came into the infirmary 3 days before I left." Severe stomach bleeding. Said the food made him sick. We tried to treat him, but his body was shutting down. Did you ever hear of something called batch B4? Ellen nodded slowly. Oh, I heard about it. They told us it was a new soy-based supplement, higher protein, less fat. But after it was introduced, we started seeing strange symptoms: rashes, vomiting, swelling. I filed reports. And they disappeared. Then my supervisor told me to stop documenting food-related cases. A week later, I was reassigned to administrative duty. I quit instead. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Whatever batch B4 is, it's not just food. It's something else. Back at her office, Laura searched for the code number. It wasn't listed in any state procurement database. No contracts, no purchase orders, nothing. It was as if it never existed. But then she tried something else. She searched federal databases. Her eyes widened when the result appeared. The same code number appeared under a Department of Defense research project, B4, Behavioral Conditioning through Nutritional Control. Her stomach turned. It couldn't be real. A government experiment? In a state prison? The description read, Controlled introduction of nutrient-modified diets to assess compliance, aggression response, and psychological conditioning under confinement. Below it, status confidential. She printed the file and drove straight to San Francisco to meet Tom Riley, an investigative journalist known for breaking police corruption stories. When she placed the papers on his desk, his face went pale. You're telling me they're testing behavioral food on inmates? It's unconfirmed, Laura said. But it explains the missing shipments, the sudden illnesses, the denials. Tom flipped through the documents, his expression hardening. If this is true, it's the biggest human rights scandal since the 70s prison experiment. But to prove it, we'll need someone on the inside. Laura thought of Ortiz. The letters he'd written. The fear in his words. He's still alive, she said quietly. At least, he was last month. Back in Pelican Bay, Ortiz sat hunched over his tray. The food looked different again, darker, almost metallic smelling. He broke off a piece and sniffed it. It had a faint chemical tang, like paint thinner diluted with oil. He pushed it aside. Not today, he murmured. That night the guards came. Cuff up, Ortiz. He hesitated. Why? Medical check, one said. They led him down the corridor to a room he'd never seen before, cold, windowless, lined with steel counters. A nurse waited with a syringe. What's that? He asked. Vitamin injection, the nurse said without looking at him. He backed up. I didn't ask for that. The guard grabbed his arm. Standard procedure. Ortiz struggled, but they forced him into the chair. The needle slid into his skin. The liquid burned as it entered his bloodstream. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The room blurred. The last thing he saw was the label on the vial, B4 compound restricted. The next morning, Laura's phone rang. It was Tom. You need to see this, he said. He'd received a tip from an anonymous source, a former state contractor willing to talk. They met that night in a motel off Highway 101. The man's face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. I used to handle logistics for the food supply, he said. But B4 wasn't just soy. It was chemically altered, designed to reduce aggression and suppress appetite. They said it kept inmates calm. Did it? Tom asked. The man shook his head. At first. Then people started collapsing. Internal bleeding, weight loss, hallucinations. They pulled the shipments and replaced them with standard meals, but only after dozens got sick. He glanced toward the window. You didn't hear it from me. They'll bury me if they know I talked. When Laura asked for proof, the man hesitated, then slid a small plastic drive across the table. Everything's on here, lab results, memos, purchase orders. But if you open this, there's no going back. That night, Laura sat in her car, laptop open, the drive trembling in her hand. She plugged it in. Folders appeared. One was labeled Project B4 Confidential Trials. She clicked it. Inside were scanned memos signed by both state and federal officials. One line stopped her cold. Data suggests long-term consumption effective in behavioral suppression. Recommend continued trials at Pelican Bay SHU. Then another. Casualties minimal, classified as natural causes. She covered her mouth, nausea rising. Outside, thunder rolled in from the coast, the storm clouds swallowing the night. Somewhere beyond the walls of Pelican Bay, Ortiz lay unconscious in the infirmary, his veins pulsing with a compound no one was supposed to know existed. And at that same moment, a black SUV idled outside Laura's office building, engine off, lights out, waiting. The cover-up. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant to leave the walls of Pelican Bay. They tried to erase it. They almost succeeded. The rain fell in sheets outside Laura Kim's office, hammering against the windows as she stared at her laptop screen. The words, casualties minimal, flickered in her mind like a warning siren. Minimal. That meant people had died, and someone had decided that was an acceptable number. The files on the flash drive were vast. Scans of government memos, contractor invoices, even clinical reports marked confidential, property of B4 program. She scrolled through one after another. Data on body weight, aggression scores, blood toxicity. Each page had a column labeled Facility, and one name appeared again and again, Pelican Bay SHU. The data wasn't old. Some files were from just 6 months earlier. She picked up her phone and dialed Tom Riley. He answered on the first ring. "You found something?" he asked. "You need to see this in person," she said. "And come alone." 30 minutes later, Tom arrived dripping wet, his camera bag slung over one shoulder. Laura showed him the files. He flipped through the documents, jaw tightening. This is human experimentation. They're treating prisoners like test subjects. "Look at this," Laura said, pointing to a table on one of the pages. "Before exposure shows reduced aggression but also organ damage." They knew the risks. Tom rubbed his face, exhausted. "If we publish this, they'll deny everything. We need witnesses. People who saw it happen." "Ortiz," Laura said quietly. "He's still inside. He's the only one left who knows." Tom frowned. "Then we get him out." Inside Pelican Bay, inmate Raymond Ortiz woke to a pounding in his skull. The infirmary lights glared white against the concrete. A tube ran from his arm to a bag marked for hydration. His skin itched, his throat burned. A nurse hovered nearby. "You're lucky, Ortiz," she said flatly. "You were dehydrated. We fixed you up." He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. What was in the shot?" "Vitamins," she replied. He didn't believe her. Every nerve in his body buzzed like an electric wire. He turned his head, saw a small tray of food by his bed, gray patty, slice of bread, watery beans. Same as always. But the smell was sharper now, metallic. He looked at the tray label. Batch B4. He pushed it away. 2 days later, Laura drove to Crescent City again. She'd arranged a confidential visit under legal counsel right. But when she arrived, the prison lobby was different. More guards. More security checks. The officer at the desk glanced at her paperwork, then shook his head. "Inmate Ortiz is unavailable." "Unavailable?" she asked. "He's my client." The officer didn't blink. "Transferred last night." "To where?" He checked the monitor. No record. That was a lie, she could see it in his eyes. Laura stepped outside, her breath misting in the cold air. Behind her, the tower lights flickered in the fog. She turned back, snapping a quick photo of the gate sign. Pelican Bay State Prison, Maximum Security Unit. If Ortiz had vanished, she was going to make noise until someone answered for it. That night, she met Tom in a motel room off the highway. They'd covered the walls in printouts, photos, note. The pattern was clear now. Inmates who complained about the food ended up transferred, deceased, or missing. Tom taped a new document to the wall, one she hadn't seen. Got this from a contact in Sacramento, he said. It's a budget summary. Look. Under Corrections Nutritional Contracts, a massive line item read, B4 Behavioral Program, Ongoing Trial. Laura stared at it. They're still funding it. Tom nodded grimly. And you know what's worse? They're expanding it. Next year, 2 more prisons. The power flickered. Both of them froze. A moment later, the motel lights went out completely. Laura's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You should have stopped at batch B4. Then, the window shattered. A rock crashed onto the carpet, wrapped in duct tape. Tom lunged forward, unwrapping it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a grainy photo of Megan, the prison nurse who'd vanished months earlier. Her face was pale, eyes closed. Below the photo, "Next time, we won't miss." Tom grabbed the files and shoved them into his bag. We need to go now. They bolted into the storm, rain slicing across the highway. They didn't notice the black SUV that pulled out behind them until its headlights flared in the rearview mirror. Don't go home, Laura said. Head south. The SUV accelerated, closing fast. Tom turned sharply onto a back road, tires skidding through the mud. The SUV followed, steady, methodical. Laura dialed 911, no signal. The car jolted over potholes. Ahead, a fork in the road appeared. Left, she shouted. They swerved, splashing through standing water. The SUV overshot the turn, but only for a second. When it reappeared in the mirror, Laura saw something chilling. Its license plate, CDCR-Gov. This isn't contractors, she said, voice trembling. It's the department itself. They drove until dawn, finally parking behind an abandoned cannery near Eureka. Exhausted, drenched, they sat in silence. Tom opened his laptop, checking the files again. There's something else in here, he said. Look at the metadata. He pulled up a timestamp. The most recent file, the memo about continued trials, wasn't created by any contractor or federal agency. The author field read, Leary, Robert, Warden, Pelican Bay. Laura felt her blood run cold. Leary's running the program. Tom nodded. And now he knows we know. Meanwhile, deep inside Pelican Bay, Warden Leary sat in his office, staring at a security feed. On the screen, Ortiz's cell was empty. The bed stripped. The tag on the door replaced with a new number. A guard stepped in. Cleanup's done, he said. Leary didn't look away from the monitor. Make sure there's no trace. And send word to Sacramento. The leak's been contained. The guard hesitated. What about the lawyer? Leary smiled thinly. We'll feed her the same thing we feed the others. Back in the cannery, Laura and Tom were preparing to send the files to multiple news outlets at once. But before she could hit upload, her laptop froze. The screen flickered, then went black. Tom cursed. They're in the system. They've wiped it. All the data gone. But Laura wasn't finished yet. She pulled a small envelope from her bag. Inside was a single USB copy she'd made earlier, sealed in plastic. She smiled grimly. Not this time. She handed it to Tom. If anything happens to me, you release everything. Tom opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. Promise me. He nodded. I promise. As dawn broke over the Pacific, fog rolling in from the cliffs, Laura stepped outside to breathe. The air was heavy with salt and rain. For a moment, she almost felt safe. Then her phone buzzed again. A new message. No words, just a photo. It was a prison tray. Gray patty. Moldy bread. Watery beans. On the tray, spelled out in ketchup, "Stop eating." The last witness. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because what happens next nearly silenced everyone who tried to expose it. The sky over Northern California was an endless sheet of steel. Laura Kim watched the fog swallow the coastline as she and Tom drove south, her hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles whitened. Neither had spoken for hours. The image of that tray, ketchup letters spelling "Stop eating," burned behind her eyes. "Whoever sent that," Tom finally said, "they knew where we were." Laura didn't answer. She couldn't. She kept seeing Ortiz's face, the nurse's syringe, the label, B4 compound restricted. By mid-afternoon, they reached a safe house in Oakland, an old apartment owned by one of Tom's contacts. He bolted the door, checked the windows, then powered up a second laptop. "We can't rely on the cloud," he said. "Too easy to trace. We'll duplicate everything here, then push it through a dead drop network." Laura nodded, staring at the tiny USB drive, the only surviving copy of the B4 documents. "We need someone inside Pelican Bay who can confirm this," she said. "Without that, it's just paper." Tom hesitated. There might be one person left. Her name was Officer Denise Vega, a former corrections guard who'd worked the Pelican Bay kitchens before quitting mid-contract. She'd moved to Eureka and kept to herself, but Tom had tracked her down through an old Union record. When they arrived at her house, she looked terrified even before they spoke. "I told the investigators everything," she said, voice shaking. "They said I misunderstood. That I was paranoid." "What did you see?" Laura asked. Vega rubbed her palms together, eyes darting toward the window. "We used to get boxes marked Nutritional Blend B4. The cooks weren't allowed to open them. We were told to mix the powder with boiling water, mold it into patties, and serve it in the SHU. After a few months, the men started getting sick. I filed an incident report. What happened after that? They reassigned me to laundry. Then my car got run off the road one night. No plates on the other vehicle. I left the job the next day." Tom leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" Vega nodded slowly. "One photo. From the kitchen. I kept it because I couldn't believe what I was seeing." She disappeared into the back room and returned with an old phone. On the screen, a grainy photo showed rows of food trays, each with gray loaf slices stacked on them. On the wall behind, a poster-sized chart labeled B4 Diet Schedule Test Cycle 3. Laura's stomach twisted. "Test cycle?" Vega nodded again. "That's what they called it. Every few weeks, a new shipment. Different color stamp. Some trays went to certain inmates only, the ones in isolation. They said it was for behavior tracking." "Tracking what?" "Violence. Obedience. How fast they followed orders." The air inside the house felt heavy. Tom downloaded the photo, encrypting it on the spot. "Please," Vega said quietly, "don't use my name." "We'll protect you," Laura said. But both of them knew protection meant nothing now. That night, Laura and Tom returned to the apartment in Oakland. As they approached the building, Laura noticed the front door ajar. The lock splintered. Tom cursed under his breath. "Stay here." He stepped inside first. The air smelled of wet metal and smoke. The living room was destroyed, papers shredded, laptop smashed. The USB drive was gone. Laura felt her chest tighten. "They found us." Back at Pelican Bay, Warden Robert Leary stood in the command office, the glow of the monitors flickering across his face. On the screens, live feeds from multiple cameras, hallways, kitchens, infirmary. In one window, a figure sat motionless on a bed, pale and thin, Raymond Ortiz. A guard entered. "She's still digging," he said. "The lawyer." "Kim." Leary didn't look up. "Then it's time we remind her who owns the truth." He nodded toward the camera. "Prepare batch C." At sunrise, Tom's phone rang. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, Laura answered. A voice, weak, rasping, barely human. Laura, it's Ortiz. She froze. Where are you? Infirmary. Pelican Bay. They're changing the food again. New batch. Batch C, she asked. He coughed hard, struggling for breath. Tastes like metal. My hands shaking. They said it's vitamins. It's not. Can you get a sample? Silence. Then a whisper. Too late. They know I called. The line went dead. That night, Laura received another email. No sender. No subject. Just an attachment labeled finalcycle.mov. She opened it. The footage was grainy, security style. A line of inmates filed through the kitchen, trays sliding across the counter. Guards watched as each man lifted a spoonful of food to his mouth. Then, one by one, they started convulsing. Guards didn't react. They just stood there, recording. The video cut off abruptly. Laura felt her pulse pounding in her ears. We have to get this out, she said. Tom nodded, already setting up the backup laptop. But before he could connect, his phone buzzed, a text from an unlisted number. Too slow. Seconds later, the apartment lights went out. Outside, the growl of engines echoed through the street. Laura ran to the window, 2 black SUVs, same as before. Doors opened. Men in plain clothes stepped out, moving fast. Tom grabbed the laptop and the phone. Back exit. They fled down the stairwell, out into the alley, rain slicking the pavement. Laura clutched the hard drive to her chest. Behind them, footsteps closed in. A voice shouted, "Stop!" Tom shoved her behind a dumpster as gunfire cracked the air, 3 sharp pops that echoed down the alley. When the noise stopped, Laura looked up. Tom was on the ground, motionless. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The world was a blur of sirens and rain. Then she grabbed the drive, forced herself to her feet, and ran. By dawn, she was gone, vanished into the fog like so many before her. Back at Pelican Bay, Warden Leary signed a brief memo. Batch C trial complete. Results satisfactory. Continue program under new designation. He scrawled the new name across the bottom margin, Project Calm. The Silence Protocol. If you haven't yet, subscribe, because what you're about to hear is how one file, one survivor, and one final broadcast nearly brought Pelican Bay's walls crashing down. 3 weeks after the night she ran into the fog, no one had seen Laura Kim. The news reported nothing about her, but the whispers spread, the lawyer who tried to expose Pelican Bay. Some said she fled the country. Others said she was dead. But the truth was stranger. She was alive, hiding in plain sight. She was living out of a safe house near the Oregon border, under a false name, her face barely recognizable under a dyed haircut and exhaustion. The hard drive she'd carried through the rain was still with her, tucked into a coffee can buried behind the house. She spent her days piecing together fragments. Backups Tom had sent to journalists before he died, emails from former inmates, coded messages from sympathetic guard. Together, they formed a picture so dark she could barely look at it. Project Calm, the renamed B4 program, had expanded. Documents leaked through an anonymous source in Sacramento confirmed it now operated in 3 state prisons, under the pretense of nutritional behavior research. The stated goal: reduce inmate aggression and resource costs through controlled diet. The real goal: compliance through chemical suppression. Each batch wasn't just soy filler. It contained trace compounds that dulled emotion, slowed reflexes, and numbed the mind, ingredients rejected for human consumption decades ago. In Pelican Bay, the SHU had become a laboratory. The results were brutal. Medical reports showed spiking cancer rates, liver failure, memory loss. And still, the state renewed the contracts. One evening, as the sky outside turned the color of steel, Laura booted up her laptop using a disconnected hotspot, a secure line she'd built with help from a friend in cybersecurity. She opened the folder marked com_proof. Inside were the videos, files, and memos she and Tom had collected. Her cursor hovered over a single command: upload all. Her finger froze. Once she hit send, there was no undoing it. She would be hunted, maybe silenced like the others. A knock shattered the silence. Her body tensed. Slowly, she reached for the small revolver she kept by the desk. Another knock, softer this time. Laura, it's Ellen. Doctor. Ellen Rivers, the former prison physician. Laura opened the door, heart pounding. Ellen stepped inside, soaked from rain, clutching a folder under her coat. I had to see you, she said. They're destroying the records. Every medical file linked to B4, gone. But I made copies before they purged the system. She opened the folder. Inside were dozens of pages: blood test results, autopsy notes, handwritten reports. Look at this, Ellen said, pointing to a line. They called it behavioral stabilization compound. But in reality, it's a synthetic tranquilizer designed for large animal sedation. They were feeding it to men in isolation, every day, for years. Laura's throat tightened. How many? At least 50 documented deaths, Ellen whispered. And those are just the ones they recorded. That night, the two women worked side by side. Ellen cross-referenced the medical data while Laura rebuilt the story. By dawn, they had everything: names, dates, formulas, internal memos, even Leary's signature authorizing Batch C. Laura looked at the screen. Once this goes live, we can't hide. Ellen nodded. Then let's not. They sent the files to every major news outlet, every civil rights group, every watchdog organization they could reach. Within hours, inboxes filled with alert. Reporters began calling. Producers asked for statements. And then, the first headline hit: Pelican Bay Experiment. Secret program used prisoners as test subjects, documents reveal. It exploded across every platform. Photos, leaked footage, survivor interviews. The public outrage was instant. Protests erupted outside state buildings. Lawmakers called for hearings. Families of inmates demanded justice. For the first time, Pelican Bay's walls couldn't contain the truth. Inside the prison, chaos followed. Staff scrambled to secure files. Warden Robert Leary locked himself in his office, phone pressed to his ear. It wasn't supposed to get out, he hissed to whoever was on the other end. On his monitor, camera feeds flickered: empty corridors, kitchens abandoned, officers shouting. Then one feed went black. Then another. A voice came through his intercom: Sir, the media's at the gate. Leary slammed his fist against the desk. Cut the feeds. End everything. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a small black folder labeled Protocol. Silence. Inside, the instruction was simple: if exposure occurs, eliminate physical evidence. Contain personnel. Deny existence of Project Calm. But it was already too late. By evening, state investigators had arrived. The media footage was everywhere. Guards smuggling boxes labeled Batch C into incinerators, shredded papers, missing records. Leary's career ended that night. His name became a headline, his voice a recording of denial. But the damage was done. For Laura, it didn't feel like victory. She and Ellen watched the coverage from the safe house, news anchors calling it the biggest correctional scandal in California's history. Civil rights groups were filing suit. The department promised full transparency. But Laura knew better. Transparency never meant truth. She looked out the window at the dark forest beyond. They'll just rename it again, she said. They'll hide it somewhere else. Ellen nodded. Maybe. But now the world's watching. A week later, a small package arrived at the safe house. No return address. Inside was a single photograph: a man sitting on a bench in a prison yard, sunlight on his face. Raymond Ortiz. Alive. The photo had a note on the back: they didn't kill all of us. Laura stared at it for a long time, tears blurring her eyes. She didn't know who sent it or how Ortiz survived, but it meant one thing: someone was still fighting on the inside. She set the photo on her desk and turned back to her laptop. The notification bell chimed. Her channel had gained thousands of new followers overnight. She clicked record. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. What happened inside Pelican Bay wasn't an accident. It wasn't mismanagement. It was punishment disguised as science. They told you it was food. It wasn't. It was control. She paused, looking straight into the camera. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Because Pelican Bay wasn't the only prison running Project Calm. The screen faded to black.